first, Helen, I wanted to thank you for this. I think this is a perfect exemplar of what the Art Science Connect initiative program can do. And I want to thank all of our panelists for being here. I'm a philosopher of art, and philosophers have like the very long view. So the kinds of questions that we're asking about originality, authorship, ethics and politics of imagery, artist moral rights, and so on. These questions go back way far, to Plato, let's say, and questions about these kinds of questions as they pertain to photography and the moving image, essentially were raised right at the birth of those media. But there's been this acceleration and kind of concentration of these questions in the past few years, and I know that as the editor of the main journal in philosophy of art. And so I'm so happy that we have 4 creators here to speak about photography and AI manipulation, and we can hear what their perspectives are. Lev, if you'd like to start, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. So first of all, I want to thank Helen for organizing everything, all of it, and also Tobias. It was quite a bit of effort to kind of add me to this discussion over Zoom, but here I am. The second thing is I want to apologize to you if I may sound not completely coherent, because it is actually exactly midnight here in Korea, and on top of it, I had to get up very early this morning to teach my class, because I'm a professor here at the Graduate Center in Computer Science. So first I was teaching my class at 7:30 a.m. and then was taking naps throughout the day, but did end up having a headache. So having given this kind of extreme physical condition, I decided that I'm not going to take the risk of actually delivering set of notes specifically focused on photography manipulation. I do have lots of things to say about it, and maybe I'll say something in the discussion section, but given that it's kind of midnight and I do have a headache, to be honest, I was just simply afraid to improvise, that I'll start talking and I will go in some strange direction. So I decided that instead I will deliver something which is actually already written, and I've done it before, but it is, right, so it's not exactly on photography and photography manipulation, but it does deal with images. So let me share the screen. Okay, yeah, perfect. So I will not present, again, theoretical paper, because you can kind of find all my excessive and extensive writing about AI online. In fact, my first book about visual AI and the impact of AI on aesthetics and visual culture, the first one was already published in 2019. You can get this online. And then in 2021, I was having lots of conversations with a friend and collaborator who is actually also happens to be coming from philosophy of art as our panel leader, Emanuel Ariely, and we decided that we have such a kind of wonderful conversation that we should do a book. And because I already had this experience of kind of publishing books online, right, making chapters available as soon as they're completed, so I can convince him to do the same thing to his book. And I think the timing was perfect. So we started publishing our chapters online. The first chapter was published in the end of 2021, and the second one, it was published in January of 22, right, and then March of 22, and then, right, we all live through this kind of cultural, technological, social boom, right, through this kind of nuclear explosion, so to speak, which is the quick rise of generative AI with visual AI tools such as Midjourney becoming available in July of 2022, and then the ChatGPT was already existing and was already used by people who knew about it. The people who knew about it already knew that something amazing was going on, and then the ChatGPT was released in November of 2022, 2 years ago. So the timing was perfect, and then we consistently adding chapters and decided that it's enough. So now our book is officially completed. Already the translation has started in Spanish, and also just the other day the translation started in Chinese. So I hope that it will be also published later as at some point in English. So in parallel to exploring the impact of generative AI on our concepts of art, creativity, aesthetics, kind of visual culture, authorship, kind of memory, and so on, I was also, in addition to writing about it, I was also doing it as an artist, and I decided that I'll make a separate website, kind of manovich.art, in addition to manovich.net, which I had for 30 years, which houses all my writings. So what I want to do in my 15 or 17 minutes is to take you through some of the image series I created and read short text which I wrote to accompany this image series, because the idea is that each of these image series deals with some kind of personal matters, right? And let's say is experiment in creating a particular aesthetic experience, and some of these experiences are very much related to my earlier work as a traditional artist. I was kind of trained first in painting and drawing at the age of 13, but also each of the series gave me an opportunity to try to come up with different, possible theoretical and art historical or critical take on generative AI. So we don't have time to go through all of them, but I'll go through a few. But before I do that, I'll very briefly show to you examples of my analog artwork. So these examples of images, etchings, kind of works on paper I was creating in my early 20s. And I grew up in the Soviet Union in Moscow, and I immigrated with my parents to New York in 1981. And this is the kind of imagery I was doing, and you'll see, I think, some references to it, some correspondences, some connections in what I've been trying to do with AI. So with this idea of kind of theatricality, a kind of theatrical world, a set, right? It was my experience of living in a late communist society, right? So everybody kind of pretends, everybody's an actor, but this act has been going on for decades. So, and I think there is no way to escape, right? There's no other reality where you can kind of exit and be yourself. And we're looking at this kind of theatrical set-like world from outside. So this was actually the very first etching I did when I took etching class at NYU in 1982. So you see this particular kind of aesthetics, also maybe some connections to surrealism, to Northern Renaissance, to Bosch and Bruegel. So things like this. Okay? Again, so people living in this kind of reality, which is actually a set, like a theatrical set, and this theatricality was my kind of image, right? My kind of metaphor of living, right, in late communist societies. Now we perhaps also know expression Potemkin village, right? So this kind of make-believe. So now let's look at how things are done with generative AI. So we'll start here. This series is called Capriccio. Okay. So Capriccio in Italian is a genre of European arts that began to develop in the Renaissance and grew during the Baroque period. Such paintings and prints depicted architectural fantasies that mix familiar and unfamiliar. Existing buildings replaced in fictional settings or imagined as worn with time or as ruins. Buildings from different places could be also juxtaposed together, and non-existent decoration and plants added. So, for example, in one of his works, Canaletto, right, the famous practitioner of Capriccio, places St. Peter Cathedral from Rome and the Doge Palace in Venice next to each other. Right? A kind of montage, right? A spatial juxtaposition. Such paintings and arts could also include small human figures called staffage. And typically, special artists were invited to paint the small figures. Right, so this is again like an art historical background and my attempt to place one possible way to kind of place generative AI within art history. Now, generative AI models are trained on hundreds of millions or billions of web images, as you know. During image generation, patterns extracted from these images are used to form new compositions. Therefore, in a certain sense, generative AI image making process as a whole can be connected conceptually to Capriccio genre, right? Because in a way, that's what technology is doing, right? It's kind of taking bits and pieces from this hundreds of millions of billions of images, and then when you generate new images, right, when you give the image to a prompt, it kind of takes these bits and pieces and creates new compositions. And so Capriccio, in a way, becomes like a kind of metaphor or conceptual framework to think about generative AI. But in some series, such as this one, I'm exploiting this idea more systematically by deliberately directing AI to create architecture fantasies. For example, my prompts for this image series include specified the phrase "modern city designed for Siberia in 1965, painted on large wood panel by Hieronymus Bosch." And then to generate this image, I can use a similar phrase, but I substituted giant airport for the city. So here's one series. Now let's look at this one. So this series is called "The Plague for Winter City," and as you can see, it's visually, iconographically, quite consciously related to my early drawings. And there is also a concept, right, which kind of goes along. The descriptions of the images I gave to AI to create this series included phrase architecture model or theater set design, okay? Or sometimes a miniature, but typically architecture set or theater set. Why? So this is one of the techniques I was using in 2022, 2023, and I still continue to use it today to kind of push AI away from its default photorealism, right? Because lots of AI models, when they generate images, they're kind of tuned by the companies to generate this, in fact, very kind of photorealistic images. But I wanted to use the different aesthetics And why did I choose, right, this particular aesthetic of, again, a kind of theater set, right, or a miniature set? Well, partly it's, of course, related to kind of iconography and the kind of aesthetics, right, the kind of imagery I was dealing with in my 20s as an artist. But partly it was also a conscious choice, because one of the challenges of making art, right, or writing fiction, right, or doing any writing music, right, or doing anything artistic with technology, because technology is developing, right, very rapidly. And as somebody who is a kind of veteran of new media art, right, I started doing digital art 40 years ago in 1984. I mean, I've seen over and over how many artists would use a particular type of latest new media computer technology and try to use like the latest, right, the latest capacity with technology, whether it was, websites in the 90s or, 3D modeling or like creative media or now generative AI, and when you're kind of using, right, kind of the state of the art, the latest ability of computer technology to do something, it's very tricky because next week its capacity is improved, right? Next week, something else becomes possible. So, for example, there are always people who, let's say, maybe last year invested their time in making short computer animation using AI models, and AI models can only generate, let's say, 5 seconds, and they have particular artifacts. So now you can look at this image, look at this animation to like, well, maybe I wasted my time, right? So being aware of these issues, right, as a kind of veteran digital artist with 40 years experience, I said, okay, what I will do is that I will specifically kind of push the AI tool away from its right, kind of state-of-the-art capacity to generate, to simulate kind of photorealistic images and make something which is supposed to be imperfect, right? So imagine this is like a set, maybe from some claymation films, maybe from Eastern Europe, maybe from former Yugoslavia or from Russia or Armenia from 1960s or 1970s. So imagine these figures are made from clay, and maybe like these buildings are made from paper. So they're supposed to be imperfect, right? In fact, this imperfections was this right the kind of result of using AI, like in 2022, 2023. This is what it can do. But I'm motivated, right? I'm motivated with imperfections by choosing this particular genre, right? This particular medium to simulate, right? So, so again, to summarize, the idea was to push AI away from its default photorealism towards a different aesthetics where imperfections look motivated, right? So in the animated films from the 60s or 70s or even today, right? I mean, hand-drawn animation continues to be a very vital genre. We may see simplified characters in minimal features of space, and this is what I wanted to get.
Perhaps close
Yeah.
things up. You can finish things up now. It's been about 20 minutes.
Okay. 30 seconds, can I have?
Sure.
Yeah, good. We imagine this, okay, we imagine a city. The series is made from simulations of memories. The city is inhabited with atmosphere, moods, with particular lights, and particular cold to winters of my childhood. We only exist now in my imagination. Although all details shown by AI, such as people or buildings, are not precise, the atmosphere and the feeling of winter in the 1970s, exaggerated, right, by visual references to animated films from Eastern Europe made at the time, feels correct. Sorry, I wanted to show more, but I think that's enough. So maybe you got some idea about kind of my approaches. So again, the idea is to specifically exploit the limitations of generative AI media at any particular moment, right? Not to go for kind of the state of the art, because the state of the art is always advancing, but to find a subject where it's artifacts, right? Glitches, if you want. I hate the word glitch, but because it doesn't quite apply here. But it says artifacts are motivated by the content. So thank you so much. I'll stop here.
Yeah, thank you so much to the conference organizers and Helen especially. It's a little intimidating to follow up Lev. I know and really love his work, but I will do my best. Today I'm going to be talking about kind of tracing from the camera obscura to AI's black box, and thinking about how image making has in fact always been about illusion. So as more advanced text-to-image generators like DALL-E, Midjourney, and ChatGPT enter the public sphere, they have felt to many users like impressive magic tricks. These new forms of image recognition and production feel so mysterious in part because the processes behind them are fairly obscure to the general public, and even sometimes to the technology's developers. But image-making technologies from their inception have had the capacity, and I would argue the tendency, to manipulate perception. William H. Mumler's spirit photographs from the mid to late 1800s, which revealed ghostly figures of deceased loved ones standing behind the sitters, could be considered a feat of appearance, conjuring something seemingly out of nowhere. In the early 1900s, Edward Sheriff Curtis's The North American Indian documented Native American tribes across the US, often staging romanticized scenes that framed his subjects as primitive and in decline. By depicting Indigenous peoples as fixed in time, Curtis constructed a false narrative of disappearance, wrought through selective and manipulative visual representation. When people talk about AI, they sometimes speak of the black box, the unknowable inner workings of the computer's visioning process. But what is photography in its origins but the camera obscura, which quite literally translates to the dark chamber? So this past summer, I spent some time exploring the photography collection at the Morgan Library and Museum, which is just a few blocks away from the building we're in today. I came to the Morgan collection eager to investigate the strange, the coincidental, the cryptic, and the illusory in photographs. As I opened boxes in the reading room and sifted through their contents, I discovered and followed unexpected but generative threads. I looked at everything from UFO photographs to hand-painted Soviet Union images, to NASA captures of the moon landing, and trippy frames within frames. Today, I'd like to present just a few of those photographs to provoke connections between older photographic histories and these new, somewhat mystifying image-generating technologies. This is a first attempt for me at bringing these photographs into dialogue with AI and synthography, so I hope you'll see this as an exploratory gesture, but an ongoing bit of work toward those ends. I want to look today to three kinds of illusions or magic tricks that I think echo across these older images and newer algorithmic ones, and those are apparition, distortion, and montage. So since it's almost Halloween, we can begin with ghosts. In a box of vernacular photos in the Morgan collection, I stumbled upon this image. It was filed under people identically outfitted. And because it is a found photograph, I know relatively little about it, and I think that ambiguity is part of what makes it so beguiling. A woman in a wide-brimmed hat, trench coat, and gloves, seemingly multiplied by 5, sits around a circular table communing with copies of herself. This image has a luminous glow, and the version of her second to the right looks directly back at us, drawing us into this mysterious one-woman seance. The back of the object reveals it to be a souvenir postcard from a trick photo booth in Atlantic City, likely in the 1920s, suggesting its association with sideshows and illusory photography as entertainment. This next print is an accidental double exposure by American photographer Emmett Gowan, a combination of the Avebury Stonehenge and the figure of Gowan's wife's grandmother in her casket. The image overlaps place as well as subject matter, bringing Wiltshire, England in contact with Danville, Virginia. The family matriarch becomes a ghost etched into the rough texture of the ancient rock, a double monument to both a Neolithic civilization and one woman's passing. Here, I'm also showing you the image of Rennie Boer in her casket without the superimposition, but her unintended appearance in the Avebury photograph feels a bit like a haunting. These doublings, and in the case of the Atlantic City postcard, quintupling of images, act as a form of conjuration and apparition, allowing spectral figures to inhabit the frame. Computer-generated images, too, are preoccupied with the desire to resurrect, to visualize that which is physically gone or inaccessible to us. Users of systems like Midjourney and DALL-E have prompted them to produce speculative images of what celebrities might look like if they were still alive today. The subjects of these range from Elvis and Tupac to Princess Diana, and I guess for those of us who grew up with Disney movies, Bambi's mom, very strangely. Perhaps more seriously, several companies have already harnessed AI to create digital avatars of the deceased for their loved ones to interact with. Some are deepfakes generated from photographs, videos, text messages, and other content provided by surviving mourners. And in other cases, clients opt in to recording hours of audio interviews or video footage to create profiles that will one day serve as chatbots after their deaths. These digital specters, either of imagined lives lived out or loved ones frozen in time, are also haunted by their sources and their precursors, built through replications and layerings. Photographs can also take what we believe to be visually true and twist it into unfamiliar, strange forms. Distortion appears in several works throughout the Morgan collection. In this photograph by French photographer André Steiner from 1933, he warps and twists the model's face and hand using a mirror, producing a portrait of the human body that is dreamlike and downright eerie. California-born photographer Brett Weston similarly uses reflective surfaces to replicate a more wobbly, abstract version of several New York City buildings. And in this photograph by Ouija from the 1950s, he seems to have attached a kaleidoscope to his camera lens, turning the street signs of 51st and Broadway into mesmerizing patterns. Ouija created his distortion series later in life, and he often worked his magic in the dark room, placing textured glass between the enlarger and photo paper, and even melting or boiling his negatives before printing them. As a photojournalist, he was more well known for his flashlit tabloid photographs of crime and street scenes, but his distortions can be seen as an artistic continuation of his fascination with the bizarre. In Ouija's work, we might sense that the evidentiary and documentary in photography are not always completely distinct from the surreal and the uncanny. Speaking of the uncanny, we might consider the kinds of glitches that disrupt our experience of synthography as a computer-created form of distortion. Image generators like Midjourney and DALL-E have been notoriously bad at rendering human hands, for example. In photos that might otherwise pass for real, figures grasp with doughy, elongated limbs and an unsettling excess of entangled fingers. These details have become a kind of smoking gun for exposing deepfakes, evidence of imperfect computer vision in the face of convincing imitations. And as you can see from this meme, also a kind of comic relief for those that are worried about AI taking over human labor. But in addition to proof of computer vision, we might also see them as a form of surrealism inherent to this new image-making medium, the digital kaleidoscope or reflective mirror through which these photos pass. And finally, let's examine the urge to splice, remix, and reassemble, or montage. In the archive, I looked at this very large and meticulous photo collage by Seattle-based artist Joe Rudko, titled Stage. Rudko hand cuts 12 photographs of performers on stage and then systematically rearranges them into a dense mosaic. Like a cubist painting, Rudko's montage dissects, collapses, and reorganizes multiple viewpoints into one simultaneous composition, defying straightforward representation while also retaining the essence of its original subject matter. Scanning the shuffled fragments of instruments, bodies, and clothing, I felt a sense of rhythm and musicality. The vertical lines at the edges of the piece resemble the decorative sides of a stage or a drawn curtain. Rudko's grid calls to mind the pixels of digital images, and he has called Stage and related works a kind of physical algorithm. In an increasingly digital visual world, this process emphasizes the objectness of an image for Redco. In the Polaroid collages of the late John O'Reilly, I also found myself examining material edges. In this one, called Rural Embrace, a pathway to a country house winds around to become an arm encircling a childlike figure with a tangle of mismatched limbs and an adult face. Picture frames, wooden blocks, and rulers populate the studio-like space on either side of the scene. The magic of O'Reilly's collages is in their intricate optical confusion. Though it's clear that the image is a collage, a peek beneath the mat reveals that the cut and paste points are not always where one might expect them to be. I found myself hovering over O'Reilly's compositions with a magnifying glass, tracing lines to see if they were physical or photographed. O'Reilly often re-photographed parts of his collages before stitching his images together and used sandpaper to file down the Polaroids into thinner layers, further concealing their seams and constructing a visual puzzle. Machine vision relies on a network of reference images far more complex and expansive than Redco's and O'Reilly's. With AI-generated images, the seams are rendered nearly invisible to our eyes, the source material so buried that we observe what appears to be an entirely new image plucked from a digital void. This desire to locate the origins of these pictures has loomed over lawsuits like the one filed by stock photography giant Getty Images against Stability AI in February of 2023, which actually Michael, who is also on this panel, tipped me off to this lawsuit. In a study of around 12 million pictures used to train the AI image generator Stable Diffusion, around 15,000 were found to be copyrighted photographs scraped from Getty's library. Part of what tipped researchers off was the appearance of Getty's watermark, rendered sometimes illegible on the AI counterparts. And so you're seeing on the one to the right, there's a kind of like blurred Getty watermark, and you can see the original Getty image on the left. So however polished these synthetic photos seem, their edges still exist, albeit encrypted in their own kind of visual puzzle. In the book Photography is Magic, curator Charlotte Cotton writes, "A magic trick, like all performance art forms played well, creates the conditions for us to explore imaginative possibilities while sharing in a slice of the real." Comparing contemporary digital photography to close-up magic, Cotton emphasizes that illusions are ultimately created in our minds, with the magician or photographer setting up the psychological frame which we can inhabit. Photography as a medium has long required collaboration with machines, and thus has also always been moving from strictly human vision, using technology to accomplish its visual manipulations in sleight of hands. Ultimately, I believe that synthography is not a break with photography, but an evolution in image making, which has compounded, consolidated, and more deftly invisibilized its tricks in ways that currently overwhelm and confuse us. How might our confrontations with AI technologies reframe not just our understanding of the image's relationship to truth in the now, but our understanding of its relationship throughout photography's history? Perhaps this is an opportunity to reconsider what we know of image and truth, to practice skepticism and deeper curiosity. Reframing photography's history as a history of illusion and artificial intelligence as a new chapter in that story might better prepare us to face the more pressing threats of these technologies, demystifying some of their magic and encouraging us all to trust our judgment more than we trust images in the first place. That's it. Thank you.
That was a perfect. I'm so happy to be going after your presentation, and you'll see how it's just perfect. I'm gonna present a ghost show. My name is Michael. My pronouns are they, them. I'm going to be talking about a project called Taking Stock. I want to give a shout out to Satyam Jha, who's in the audience here with us, who is a physics PhD candidate here at the Graduate Center, who's been helping me with this as a research assistant, along with Brandon Flores, who just started working with us, who's a student from the College of Staten Island of mine. I also want to note that there are flashing images in this presentation. I will call them out. But if you can't look at flashing images, please don't look. Yeah. So I have collected 130 million stock photographs. We've talked about stock photographs before. What are stock photographs? you've seen these. They're the kinds of images that are taken on spec by photographers for sale to be used in advertisements and brochures. We unfortunately have them on the CUNY Graduate Center website rather than pictures of actual students. We tried to put pictures of actual students on. They didn't meet the aesthetic. I'm going to do something slightly unconventional, I think, which is I want to show you the work and just let you look at the work. And then I'm going to talk about how I made it, and then we're going to come back to the work. So I created photographs and videos. Oh, that's really blown out on that screen, but you can actually see one of the images over there. And the title of that work is this. Topic 63, pose 23, gesture 21, object 67, pink phone, parentheses, phone, mobile, communication, etc. And that one is topic 22, pose 24, gesture 99, finger, gesture, point, etc. This is the video. The video is going to go, I'm going to play about maybe a minute of the video.
Shocked and concerned, stunned young Asian woman gasping. Hands on mouth, popping eyes.
Young handsome man holding coffee to take away covering. Mouth with hand, shocked and afraid for mistake. This happy businessman standing isolated on white background.
Handsome, young Caucasian man isolated on white background. Shocked.
The studio portrait of handsome, cheerful worker with helmet, overalls, isolated, happy, a young, pretty brunette woman, fashion and business building, posing cheerful, lifestyle. A studio portrait of covering mouth with hands arms. Well, surprised at covering mouth with hands, shocked and afraid for mistake.
That's a, ooh, I'm getting an echo, sorry. That's a, that one goes on for 10, it's a 10-minute video. So stock photography has biases, and AI is learning from them. Stock photography, I think, is important to look at regardless of whether AI is learning from them. It's around us all the time. It's really unconsidered, under-theorized. No decent photo historian will touch it with a 10-foot pole. It reeks of commercialism and cliches. But it's really, I think, important. Now, AI is learning from them. If we look at the data sets that are training these models, Lion 5B is the current largest open available one, and it is full of stock photographs, especially at the highest level of the quality of images. The large images have a lot of images that are stock photographs. The development after Lion 5B, the layer at the very top of the training set, is that in the last 2 years, all of the companies have licensed the images from, so OpenAI licensed from Shutterstock, Adobe licensed, I mean, just took its own images that it had licensed. And that's what's giving it the ability to start to get the hands right, in part. So AI's tools are treating stock photographs as factual information, but they're far from neutral. Just to come back to the same image I showed you, pointing out their lack of neutrality, we can see at the most basic level in this data, gender is a binary. Women all have long hair. It should be up if you're at work. The men all have beards, and most people are white and young. So in some level, my question is, what is in these images, which is to say, what is AI learning about us? My data set. There are 130 million images in it. I've pulled from, yes, the obvious sites, Getty, Shutterstock, Adobe, iStock, etc., but also some of the less obvious sites, Images Bazaar, India Picture Budget, Afropix, and Pixie, which is based out of Thailand. And you can see just the scale. I think I have every image of an individual person taken prior to the onset of the sort of model collapse where the AI images get put into the stock photographs themselves. So I finished my scrape before that happened. I've done two major analyses here. One is keywords. I built a topic model which is a statistical machine learning approach to understanding relationships between sets of words. So in this case, the sets of words are the keywords associated with the image and the metadata. And you can see the largest, this is organized by count. The largest topic is the shirt, clothing, jeans. People describe based off of their clothing. The next is business, corporate executive. That's sort of not surprising given the nature of what we understand stock photography. The third one is surprising: finger, gesture, point. When I started to analyze this data, I found this enormous amount of images of people pointing at empty space or holding a cell phone that has nothing on it, pointing at it, smiling. Have you ever done that? No, I hope not. I mean, unless someone's been a stock, has anyone been a stock model in here? That would be awesome. You have? Oh, yes, I want to talk to you afterwards. So this is the model. You can see things that make sense in here. Some of them make a little bit less sense. So when I looked at the data by location, I learned something else as well. This on the left column for both of these graphs is the percentage of images that have an ethnicity other than white. And the bottom is the gender, the percentage of women. So the left is not women, the right is women, men, women. Again, like I said, gender is essentially a binary in this data. Trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming they're just like 0.01%. So you can see there's these squares down here at the bottom. That's Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, and Serbia is this little circle. The former Soviet Union is the largest producer of these images. And they are they're more women than the baseline, and they're the most white images, the least ethnically, racially diverse images in the entire data set. I have theories about that, but I'm going to leave them out for now. This is the topics based off of the same ratios. And you can see that there's a cluster of topics down here on the right. Fashion, this is fashion beautiful. This is skincare, makeup fashion. This one is weddings, sport exercise, are all more women and more white, which is to say the more women in the top are in a topic, the whiter the topic gets, or vice versa. I don't know which is the dependent variable, but we've had a lot of conversation in cultural critics and on TikTok and Snapchat about why these filters, beauty filters, make people of color skin lighter. People with dark skin gets lighter. The facial features become more European looking, right? The data is tagged that way. Like no one's actually looked inside the data. No one is foolish enough to spend 2 years scraping and analyzing it. I don't know. But the best we could say was the data is biased. But now I actually have some texture to that. The other analysis is based off of the people, like the positions of the bodies, the faces, where the face is looking, where the bodies are, where the hands are, what the hand gestures are. So to get an image like this, and the monitors in here are not, it's a little blown out. It's a much darker image. And you can see that there's a person smiling, holding a cell phone. The cell phone is pink. It's at their heart center. They have longer hair. They're smiling very big. Their eyes are open quite large. This is all of the images in the phone mobile communication topic, and where the pose is hands at their heart center. This would also be the same pose, as would this, as would this. The hands are all in the same place, but they're different gestures. So I have 3 dimensions there: topic, pose, and gesture. And that looks like this. This is the topic for phone. And on the left, it's actually it's a long chart. I don't expect you to read that. I'm just showing this to you as an understanding of the data. Left is poses, right is gestures. But I do want you to see here, this one right here, 3726. Those are all of the images of the phones in this position, this cluster. That one also, that's with the silver phone. That's the title of that one. So you can see topic 63, which is phone, pose 23, gesture 21, object 67. I'm also detecting whether there are or are not phones. So when we come back to this one, I'm going to show this video again. You can see that I'm going to jump through this because you saw this part. So same pose, same gesture, different pose, different gesture. You saw that switch? The hands are crossed. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to go all the way out. I want us to think about these as latent images in the data set. There are 6,587 images or clusters of images where there's more than 100 where I could produce one of these images. These are the locations in the data. And this is like, it's not the same thing, but it is like the way in which in a image model, there are latent images in there based off of data. And what I want you to be able to see is the idea of the way in which this kind of statistical vision might be visualized. This is depressed, stressed problem. This is finger gesture point. That's that image up there. This is fashion, beautiful pose. This is another phone. Phone is one of the biggest topics in these like most concentrated of them. This is business corporate executive, arms crossed. And shock surprise mouth. So that's the work.
All right. Hello. Welcome, everybody. Thanks to Art and Science Connect. I'm Tobias Fandel. AI noise and naivety. First, I will introduce the promise of reversibility before reflecting on naivety and generative AI. The promise of reversibility. Recent breakthroughs in generative AI have impacted our daily lives and media landscape. The analog reproduction of media content has been disrupted and surpassed by the acceleration of digital files within computational networks across the globe. The outspoken promise of the latest technological advances is advertised as follows. Through the process of machine learning-based upscaling and enhancing, the degradation through compression of poor images or sound files can be reversed, restored, or recovered. But this process induces AI noise, which adds mostly unrelated or speculative data in an unpredictable process. As Walter Benjamin professes in 1935, in principle, a work of art has always been reproducible. Man-made artifacts could always be imitated by man. Replicas were made by pupils in practice of their craft, by masters for diffusing their works, and finally by third parties in pursuit of gain. The technological reproduction of a work of art, however, represents something new. With the advent of digital technologies, unlimited multiplications of media files, and the recent spread of AI tools, another distinctly new phase for art production, distribution, and consumption must be addressed. The German media artist, filmmaker, and essayist Hito Steyerl has concluded in her well-received essay In Defense of the Poor Image, "Poor images are poor because they are not assigned any value within the class society of images. Their status as illicit or degraded grants them exemption from its criteria. Their lack of resolution attests to their appropriation and displacement. But apparently, we can overcome this with AI. Degraded qualities can be enhanced. Missing resolution can be recovered. And when degradation is reversed, value can be regained or even added." The following example shows 3 photographs, the low resolution original accompanied not with 2 copies or versions of it, but rather AI upscaled renderings, one of which additionally implementing a phase recovery model. The speculative additions in the middle picture appear to have compromised the optical perspective and sense of depth. The right image seems enhanced at first, but when zooming in closer, the similarity to the original is almost lost, while the middle image diverges drastically. The machine learning filter Studio Sound by Descript promises a clean podcast audio fidelity without exposing background noises or cheap room acoustics to the listener. The following audio file contains a background party chatter noise floor with the main voices repeating, "This is the important text." After the original has been played, the Studio Sound filtration follows.
This is the important text. 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 And for important text. This is the 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 important text.
Although one can attest to a certain enhancement in all examples above, induced disturbances exert novel qualities and contaminate the media object. In the following, I will refer to these phenomena as AI noise. I distinguish 3 types of AI noises: in meaning, induced by seeds and temperature, and caused by frame interpolation. The following slides compare the 9 output variations of DALL-E Mini and Crayon, essentially the same generative image creator, just hosted on different servers for enhanced accessibility. The prompt goes, two girls, Mona and Lisa, are having a cup of coffee. The clear confusion of the given names with the painting title can be seen throughout. And although the further advanced training status of Crayon more than 1 year later provides more photorealistic results, the visual translation of the prompt's meaning remains mostly bizarre. I rephrased the prompt to adapt for these ambiguous interpretations. 3 girls, Mona Lisa and Anna, are having a cup of coffee. The missing comma between Mona and Lisa apparently offers a probabilistic rendering which can be perceived as a creative interpretation of the prompt. Yet our desire to see such creative connections materialized might be the actual reason behind our judgment. The next layer of AI noise is based on seeds and temperature differences in the generative process. And although the following video displays a still frame from a 3-second video on the given prompt, which is then upscaled with phase recovery based on 3 different seeds. And seeds are the initializing values or vectors used to generate the starting point. Similarly, AI frame interpolation induces a novel logic of motion and object trajectories, which can be seen in the next video examples. But why call it AI noise and not AI distortion? Because the processes are adding more information which apparently enhances the quality, yet are speculative or even wrong in context and meaning. The following slide shows the application of a shadow mapping based on control net and image-to-image modifications. With the light and shadow situations seem convincingly incorporated, the actual building architecture appears to have changed in some details, such as the rounded window frames that have vanished. Therefore, the notion of AI noise with its probabilistic nature denominates the novel phenomenon much closer than the concept of distortion. And what happens when AI noise is aestheticized? The next series of images display several AI colorizations which fail to recover the blue of the sky or even fail to keep the blue sky blue. Apparently, the software customers demand a degraded and aged version of the black and white photograph when colorized. This might be explained by the commercially driven machine learning algorithms, which deliver the implemented expectation of how the past should look like from the perspective of today. But why use an AI colorizer anyway? You could be doing a school project. You could be a historian. First conclusion, AI noise is relevant, but not as expected. The immediate sensation of AI noise constitutes a novel type of perception. However, this expansion of the perception makes true reversibility impossible. Nostalgia can be understood as a commodity which drives the aesthetics of the algorithm. These built-in nostalgic qualities are thus redefining and subverting the technological reproducibility of art. And despite numerous potentially harmful facets, AI noise and the perception of it can be stimulating in various creative domains and thus contribute to AI proficiency. In practical terms, AI proficiency for artists is built upon the creative encounter with AI tools, which can only be naive at first, since the hidden layers of the neural networks make a step-by-step comprehension impossible. The suggested and advertised simplification of such creative process proclaims intuitive access by text prompting and celebrates the bypassing of skills and craft to unlock a more immediate and accelerated artistic expression. The inherent layers of naivety shall be discussed in the next section. Generative AI promises to replace the artist's skills and expertise, thus allowing for a naive encounter within a changed and accelerated creative methodology. However, because text-based prompting serves as the human-AI interface, the paradigm of plausibility asserts familiarity, which keeps the encounter naive. Through the prevalence of generative text interface AI concepts, the intrinsic relationship of prompt and result is validated reflexively, thus becoming an integral part of the interactive exchange. In other words, plausibility becomes paradigmatic. But what is naivety after all? When naively asking Google's AI-powered search, I'm educated about the characteristics of a naive person as having a lack of experience, a lack of self-awareness, or a poor vocabulary. In the context of this talk, when discussing the topic of naivety in the creative domain, there are three layers to consider. Artists encounter and engage methods and tools in the creative process. The audience encounters art, and artists and theorists engage art as expert audiences or art critic. The following matrix shows intersections of possible relationships of these layers and properties of naivety in the context of artistic production and perception. The lack of self-awareness intersecting with the artist's methodology appears to be the most interesting attribute with regards to the disruptive emergence of creative AI technologies. The graph, called Wundt curve after the psychologist Wilhelm Wundt, identifies the arousal potential of simple, complex, novel, and familiar stimuli, as can be derived from the curve. A complex and novel stimulus, when repeated, grows familiar over time and gains hedonic value and is appreciated more. While on the other hand, a simple but novel stimulus loses its appeal when repeated and familiarized. Furthermore, the subjectivity in assessing novelty, complexity, and the arousal potential of creative results from the perspective of the artist seems further complicated under the influence of generative AI. In this scenario, self-awareness is challenged and undermined by the paradigm of plausibility, preventing the appreciation of the unknown, since the ML training reflects back on the cultural background. Therefore, substantial novelty is prevented despite the accelerating multiplication of new generative iterations, as long as linguistic plausibility is asserted, as if we would play the Turing test with ourselves, which recently has become a more popular theme in the entertainment industries. Final conclusion, the promise of generative AI remains untouched only if the creative encounter upholds the paradigm of plausibility and thus remains naive. A naive application of AI to bypass creative constrictions of craft and skill will unconsciously induce AI noise and nostalgic qualities. And finally, the creative potential of human AI interfacing without text-based prompting has yet to be unleashed. While rejecting the paradigm of plausibility, novel modes of interaction likely would benefit the self-awareness regarding the creative use of generative AI tools. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a little time for questions, and let me just raise one topic of discussion that you can all or none of you can comment on. So in the talks by Michael and Tobias, you have an interesting connection. Tobias discusses the risks of naivete as a kind of controlling factor over these images and the use of these tools and techniques. And Michael brings out the ways in which the imagery, particularly in stock imagery, actually embodies all sorts of the biases of the cultures at large from which they're taken. It seems like that's a perfect storm for art to enhance and perhaps even embed biases that we're not aware of. We approach these things naively. We see them as illusionistic in a way, right, or as representing reality, and they have been trained on imagery which is not at all true to reality. So that becomes a kind of illusionistic culture that art presents to us as if to reflect ourselves back to ourselves. Any thoughts on that that danger or that risk?
Yeah, so thanks for the amazing talk, Michael. And I think my paradigm of plausibility actually is very much based in the stock aesthetics. So that's exactly what you're working out there with all those gestures that are so identical and then are in quotes like learned by the AI and then represent what we basically double check when we use a text prompt. So we want the text to be translated and the translation is based on all those stock images. And that's this vicious feedback cycle that keeps us naive when we stick to that logic, basically.
Is it on now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm still wrapping my head around the naivete theorem. I also think that there's some amongst some of the there's a I'm just going to throw this out there. I have nothing to back this up with, but I think that there's some people who are honestly naive and there's some people who are willfully naive about the way they're using it. Like some people who just don't understand, and there's some people who like the output.
And I mean, in a sense, every first encounter is essentially naive per definition. So, because how can we have experience when it's a first experience? And in that sense, I would even argue when we uphold the let's say the stock aesthetics as a truth, so to say, as a cultural truth, then we want to be cushioned by that naivety.
But I would also say that I don't think that these are first impressions. I think that your presentation points to the ways in which these are long-standing practices, and we do have some references for them. And stock photography is not a new phenomenon either.
Well, text prompting as a
right.
thing. Yeah.
But I mean, there's the idea of getting it from the words. Yes, that's new. But the kinds of I think that there's some histories here.
If you have questions, go to either microphone so that people online can hear you.
There are microphones on both sides, so if it's easier, the other ones, whichever one.
Go ahead.
Hello, I'm a professor of design at Queens College, so I'm going to ask a question on my students' behalf. What do you guys think of the future of visual arts and design based off of what we've talked about in the past and the current state?
Well, as for my point of view, I think the discovery of AI noise as a phenomenon that is noise but not a signal noise opens like lots of creative doors to just find a new friction, so to say, that because the oftentimes digital media is somewhat a cold medium. There is the manual aspect is missing, but somehow I see lots of AI works or digital works with this AI noise being more physical in a metaphorical sense, and I think that's an opportunity.
Is this on? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's a big question. And I think maybe only speaking, I would say from the photo perspective, I don't know that I can speak to all of design and art. I do think something that I didn't quite get at within this paper, but is of interest to me is I do think that while these are replicating in some ways, some of the things that have very much been a part of photography's history and sort of, I think, again, compounding them and shifting them, I do think that brings up important things around sort of like the acceleration of the kinds of extraction that have also been a part of photography, both extraction of people's labor, extraction of culture, extraction of resources, right? AI requiring an enormous amount of resources to run. So yeah, I think those are things that we should be thinking about and looking out for in addition to kind of the creative outputs that they provide.
I'm teaching a class right now at the College Staten called AI and the Future of Creativity, and we're making it up as we go. So that's my answer.
Mhm. There's an anecdote, it's probably apocryphal, but it's Paul Delaroche, who was a famous 19th century history painter. He's responsible for those really boring large canvases in the Louvre. And he was up on his easel, painting umpteenth thing for some aristocrat. And his assistant runs in with an example of the daguerreotype, which wasn't even a multiple form of photography, right? But it was an early form of photography. Shows it to Paul Delaroche up on his easel. And Paul Delaroche says, "From today, painting is dead." Okay. That didn't come to pass. So one thing for students of design and students of art in general, right, is to remember is that again and again, new technologies are introduced as if like, that's it. We finally can put to bed all those old ways of working, and now it's available to everyone. And maybe it's true now, but it doesn't seem like we should be so confident based on past experience.
Hi, thanks for your presentations. I'm an art critic and I'm interested in finding ways of talking about the formal properties of AI images and the processes by which they're created that cuts through a lot of the mystification and naivete that often is found in the discourse around them. And so one way I've come to think about them is about generative AI imagery is that they sample from large data sets and they are kind of creating these statistical averages of images. And Michael's presentation demonstrates this really well, because if you have someone with their hand over their mouth, like here, here, and here, that's how you end up with 9 fingers, or like the borders of bodies are often blurry because there are lots of different points where the body can possibly be. So I'm wondering if you would agree with that, if there are any corrections to it. And I also have a question in particular for Jessica, because I see those trick photography practices as really connected to like properties of the lens or darkroom development processes that are very different from the kind of sampling that I see in AI. So I'm wondering how you reconcile those things.
Yeah, they're definitely not a one-to-one, I think, in this case. And I think kind of as we were pointing to, there's multiple moments, especially in photography's history, even more recently, like with the introduction of Photoshop was another moment where everyone was like, photography's dead, right? And so yeah, I'm not so much trying to say that they work the exact same way, but that I think maybe our response to them is often in the moment historically quite similar, right? There's like this really amazing story of kind of very, very early photography around the time of the daguerreotype and people making portraits. And someone walked into a photo studio and was like, you know, can you make a portrait of my wife? And the photographer was like, sure, bring her in, you know? And he was like, well, she passed away. And like the photographer was like, well, I can't actually make a portrait of her. But there was this idea of like a photograph almost being like this form of time travel, right? Like so mystical to people that that was confusing to even understand. So yeah, I think I'm more interested in kind of connecting the way that we respond to these like technological developments, but not so much that they're exactly replicating the same processes. Yeah.
I think what you're talking about in terms of like where these sort of statistical averages find these clusters, I think that's one of the things that I've come to understand from what I was doing. When I started doing the project, I had a kind of slightly different goal. I was just trying to figure out what it would be like to thinking about ways of putting images in a sense of order so that you could see them at scale. And then I actually started before stock photography started to be the key thing, or around the time when stock photography started to be the key thing in the models. And that has allowed me to understand, actually has allowed me to understand in a sort of deeper way some of the ways in which these kinds of cliches are embedded late. It's sort of like latent locations in the data. There's a lot of talk about vectors, like the vector and the location in the data, and et cetera. And it's very abstract. And in many cases, I find the language is very technical and sometimes meant to obscure and not open up what's actually happening. And I found visually that this allowed the ability to see some of that in action, to see the way that when you start to spread the data out along these ways in which it can be analyzed, it clusters in certain places, and that's what becomes legible, right? So we talk, there's the vector, like the word vector, the idea that like there's a way of seeing an accumulation of words. So when you put in Mona Lisa, right? The phrase Mona Lisa is so deeply associated with this node of images that are of that painting because it's probably the most photographed painting in the world. There's more images of it anywhere. So it's this sort of has this real incredibly large gravitational pull because there's just so many images there in the field. And the way in which these words point to these clusters of images. That's part of the sort of statistical averaging. But I think when you start looking at stock photography, you get another kind of factor, which is the images themselves and why they were taken. This is like the detritus from advertisements. It's the family of man seen through like the vanquishing lens of capitalism or something like that's a very grand sentence, but like it's trying to see everyone, but everyone is not part of what is shown. And you end up with certain kinds of averages. I was looking at there's the profile picture generator. There's one that's like just faces and it now does bodies. And I started to just get interested. I was just like, one night I was looking at generating, and it knows very well what a female body looks like in full. But it could not do the men, especially once you got to the waist and below. I didn't get a single penis that was rendered in any way legibly. Like sometimes there was a whole other man that came out from the penis. Sometimes it was this kind of like droopy thing that just kind of like Dali'd out. And that's because of what is available and how that constructs what we can see and what ends up getting shown to us.
Good.
I had a question for you, Michael, but prompted by one of the categories that Jessica discussed, the collage, because I think it's very powerful to see those stock photo images in montage and then also as the sort of eigenface representation. But I just wondered, did you try, or if not, why not, showing like a grid or other arrangement of collaged images? Trevor Paglen has done this, like in a Barbican, exhibit of different AI images that use, not AI images, but images that are used in training. So I wondered about that.
Yeah, I think for me, I was a friend named Jen Liu was doing a crit in a program I used to run, and one of the things that she said when she was looking at somebody's work was, you have all your ingredients, they're all, this is my paraphrase of it, they're all chopped and ready to go. You have your mise en place, but you haven't actually cooked them. Like you need to actually cook them. You need to actually transform them. And so for me, one of the things as someone who works in this really uncomfortable space between, really subtle space between art, research, data visualization, it's really important for me not to just present the research as art and to not present the visualization as art, because I think art has something more. It has a poetics and has something transformative. And so for me, often the work that just shows the thing itself hasn't transformed it to the point where it surpasses that, I think. I have been thinking about what it would be like to actually make a book of all of the images, or at least a really large selection of them that would be, very small. So you start to, then it's no longer the original thing, right? It's not the actual thing you see it as the image. You just start to see it just as the repetition. And so that would be another kind of transformation for me.
Just to add to that, I had seen your video version of it, but I think the one that's on the wall there as an example, like they're so much more ghostly and they're kind of haunted by these images in a way that I think is really interesting.
That raises a question. To what extent should we talk about what's on the wall as the work, or is that simply a trace of the work that belongs in this space online, digitally, however?
I think that the work on the wall is one of it. There's multiple forms of it. That's one of them. I think that like I my degrees are in photography. And I haven't made like photos for the longest time, but when I started making this work, I was like, whoa, this is a really photo project. And I made the images thinking, I can't just, what's the still for the video? How am I going to reproduce this in any kind of other form? And I was like, well, oh, I could do this. And then I was like, oh, and this has so many references to such a deep history of photography. Present, Trevor, Jason Salavon, Nancy Burson, but also more distant and more troubling, Galton, but also the spirit photography that you're showing, right? This long, deep, and also, yeah. So, but then I printed it and I was like, oh, this is way better than this digital image because it has a strange three-dimensionality to it that is not at all present on the screen. There's something weird about how it becomes a hologram. In this kind of, I'm calling it a statistical blur. It's a blur I'd never seen before. It's not a radial blur. It's not a Gaussian blur. It's a blur that is based off of the probability that something is in a given space. And the further you get from certain features, the less probable it's going to be. And that produces a really interesting effect as a print image. When I printed it, I was like, let's see if this works. I have no idea. And then I was like, oh, this is way better than I thought it would be.
when you teach, you become very comfortable with uncomfortable silences. So we can wait a moment if someone has a question, Kirsten. Do you, anyone wants to speak to this? Oh, okay, good. Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't see. Jonathan, go ahead.
Thanks. I had a question that might be for both Lev and Michael about the way in which the research itself could be reverse engineered, I think, to produce, let's say, a better representative model. That is to say, you could use your findings, Michael, right, and the statistics of your findings to make a visualizer of images, a generative image maker that would go towards the less likely images rather than the more likely, right? And to seek out the things that are the statistical that are statistical anomalies, in fact, in the data set, right? One could imagine a very different kind of image creation that would come from that. And so I kind of wanted to hear you muse a little bit about that. Like, what if there was an image, like what kinds of new problems might occur, even if we had, so one method would be to get a better data set. And I think that's sort of what your main line was pushing towards. But another would be to just change the algorithm so that it focuses more on the anomalies within the data set that you already have.
One of my questions, like in my notes, is, are there any men crying? And because again, this is so gendered, all of it's so gendered. And there are men crying, but they're all bawling and like a screaming cry. And their hands are like this is the most extreme gestures. And so on some level, I don't know whether one could actually, it's an interesting question from a computer science perspective that I don't know the answer to. Could one rewrite the model to change the emphasis of what is looked at? Can you invert things? But then the second question is there even enough data in those spaces? And then the third, to like point to like Mimi Anoha's like the archive of missing data sets, databases, like, can you know what you don't know? What can you know what is not there? I don't think so.
Should
Oh,
I also try to answer?
Say again.
Yes. Should I also, since the question was also addressed to me, should I say something?
Sure.
Yeah, you guys hear me? I wasn't sure. Okay. It is 1:30 here in the morning, so I may not be completely clear. So to me, as a kind of theorist, but also the practitioner, what I found is that the key issue with using kind of visual generative AI at this point, and it's a moving target, right? So things can change, next 6 months, next year, or next 2 years, but maybe not. Is that of course, what's in the data sets, which I used to train the models, right, are important, but we shouldn't very literally, right, kind of, associate the outputs with the data sets, right? Because the whole idea of generative AI technology is that it can interpolate, right? It can morph between things, right? I mean, what excites this computer scientist about this form of AI is that you can kind of generate things which you haven't seen before, right? So you go to computer science papers, and there's going to be some example of some, bear on a bicycle, I know, like eating bagel with some strange hat on the moon, and it's not something which is in the data set, right? But as a practitioner, right, with lots of art experience, here's what I found, right? If you try to generate something which more or less, right, existed in the data. You can generate like photographs of people, you can specify, all kinds of cameras and all kinds of apertures, etc. You get perfect result. But when you ask, right, when you type a prompt, right, or you use, other ways to prompt the model to create something which actually is not in the data set, right, or which is maybe very rare, right, among this, billions of images, let's say 5.5 billion image and text pairs used to train stable diffusion, or 800 million images may be used from a journey of what we don't know. What happens is that the model behaves, right, in an interesting way, right? It kind of generates it, but the quality goes down, or it can substitute what you want by something more generic, more typical, right, more stereotypical, more common, right? So you get either the quality kind of goes down, or it makes something which is more stereotypical. And the metaphor, and I've been trying to come up with a metaphor, right, to describe it, because it's very, very hard to get at theoretically, because one moment it works, the next moment it doesn't work. But the metaphor, which I like to use sometimes, it's like as though you're making a painting with like a Lego blocks. Like, yes, you can create practically any subject, but when you look closely, the details may be a bit generic, the details may be a bit very typical, maybe don't have the same refinement as you want. But as I said, it is a moving target. So that's to me, is the kind of biggest issue. And of course, all of you, right, are also using probably text generators, or maybe using them to grade the student works, or let's say I'm using, Claude AI, to write, summaries of my book chapters. And you probably notice the same thing happens with text generation, right? If you try to summarize text, or if you kind of give the AI an idea and say, can you explain this idea in a paragraph? Sometimes it's incredibly precise, and obviously it's smarter than most of us, right? Except very few professionals. And sometimes it's like too generic, right? Too stereotypical, too common, and you can never quite know what you're going to get, right? And it's very, very frustrating. So sometimes, I would kind of give AI my ideas and say, can you expand them into a paragraph? And when it makes a paragraph, and I would say, okay, I will put this paragraph in my book chapter. And then I will come back to it a few days later and I would read this paragraph and say, no, that's not what I want. It's a bit too generic, right? It's a bit too much made from these Lego blocks, right? So this is, and again, it's very, very hard, I think, theoretically to can describe it, because sometimes it works, even other times it doesn't work. But in general, right, this tendency to kind of generalize, right, this tendency to aggregate things and to maybe not have specificity in details is maybe one of the biggest, is maybe the issue with these models. And I will finish in a second. And I think it happens because the whole idea, right, of statistics and probability, and also AI, which is based on the same kind of concepts and the same techniques. So it goes back to the 18th century and the origins of statistics. That you aggregate data, right? You aggregate information, right? When you aggregate information, you're producing these averages and you get rid of details. When you think about how AI models, right, what we do in the process of training, right, you give them billions of images, and then you get this neural net, which is in terms of its size, right, it's much, much smaller than the original data, right? So when you go from bigger data, right, which is maybe more diverse and has some rare things, right, particular leaves and particular fingers and penises, Michael wanted, whatever it is, right? Things can disappear, and when it tries to create them by interpolating what it has, and it creates these artifacts. So to me, this kind of issue, right, of loss of particular detail, loss of kind of high frequency information, I think it's very, very fundamental. It's kind of part of what we do with data society since the 20th century, and I'm not sure, like, while things are improving, I'm not sure it can be fundamentally fixed. Now, if you want to make art which is about generalizations, about stereotypes, about kind of averages, then it's okay. But if you want to make this highly realistic art, and you want to, let's say, AI to make you forest where every tree and every branch and every leaf is unique, then it has problems. Thank you.
So I promised I'd be strict about the time. Let's thank all of our speakers from this morning, and